Think your survival gear is tough? Vikings were conquering frozen seas and hostile lands with nothing but iron, wood, and raw ingenuity over 1,000 years ago. While we panic when the Wi-Fi goes down, these Norse warriors built tools that kept them alive through brutal winters, month-long ocean voyages, and constant warfare. Today, we're discovering 10 Viking inventions that didn't just make life easier, they made survival possible. And here's the shocking part. Every single one still works today. Get ready to discover why Viking technology might be exactly what you need when modern convenience fails you. The Firesteel and Flint Kit, your pocket inferno. Long before Bic lighters or waterproof matches, Vikings carried their fire in a small leather pouch. The Firesteel and Flint Kit was every warrior's lifeline, a piece of high-carbon steel, sharp flint, and charred cloth that could spark flames anywhere, anytime. Vikings would strike steel against flint, sending hot sparks onto tinder made from birch fungus or charred linen. It wasn't fast, but it was foolproof. The technique required skill and patience. Vikings would hold the flint steady in one hand while striking downward with the steel, aiming to shave off tiny molten particles. These sparks, burning at over 5,000 degrees, would land on carefully prepared tinder, usually charred cloth, made by burning linen in an oxygen-starved environment. The char cloth would catch the spark and glow like an ember, which could then be transferred to a bundle of dry grass, birch bark, or pine needles. In howling Arctic winds or soaking rain, this kit meant the difference between warmth and death. Viking explorers crossing the North Atlantic knew that wet wood, frozen hands, and brutal weather could kill them if they couldn't start a fire. The beauty of the Firesteel system was its reliability. No moving parts to break, no fuel to run out, no expiration date. Modern survivalists still swear by this method because it never runs out of fuel, never breaks, and works in conditions that would kill a lighter. The sparks are hot enough to ignite tinder, even when everything else is damp. Military survival instructors teach Firesteel techniques because they work at altitude, in extreme cold, and after being submerged in water. You can buy a Firesteel kit today for under $20. And it'll outlast any modern fire-starting gadget you own. The steel striker will produce thousands of sparks before wearing out. And flint is literally everywhere. Any hard, sharp stone will work in a pinch. Some modern versions use ferrocerium rods that throw even bigger sparks, but the principle remains unchanged. Whether you're camping, preparing for emergencies, or just want a reliable backup fire source, the Viking Firesteel represents 1,000 years of proven performance that no modern convenience can match. The longship's clinker hull, flexible strength that bends without breaking. Viking longships weren't just boats, they were floating survival machines built with a technique called clinker construction that revolutionized maritime travel. Instead of smooth planks fitted edge to edge like modern boats, Vikings overlapped each wooden board and riveted them together with iron nails, creating a hull that flexed with ocean swells rather than fighting them. This seemingly simple design change made their ships virtually unsinkable in conditions that would destroy rigid vessels. The genius lay in understanding how water and wood behave under stress. When massive North Atlantic waves hit a rigid hull, the force transfers directly to the joints, causing catastrophic failure. But clinker construction distributed stress across the entire hull through overlapping joints that could move independently. Each plank could flex slightly without compromising the whole structure, like scales on a fish or feathers on a bird. Vikings used this technique to build ships that could beach on rocky shores, navigate shallow rivers, and survive ocean storms that sent other vessels to the bottom. The overlapping planks also created natural drainage channels that helped shed water, while the flexible joints sealed tighter under pressure rather than pulling apart. This flexibility let their ships ride massive waves that would shatter rigid vessels, enabling Vikings to explore from Greenland to Constantinople when other cultures hugged coastlines. The design was so brilliant that modern boat builders still use clinker techniques for small craft, rescue boats, and traditional sailing vessels. Wooden lifeboats on modern ships often use clinker construction because it's more reliable than fiberglass in extreme conditions. In a survival situation, this principle applies to any shelter you build. Rigid structures break, flexible ones survive. Whether you're building a lean-to or reinforcing your home, the Viking approach of overlapping, flexible joints will outlast any rigid construction when nature gets violent. Modern earthquake-resistant buildings use similar principles. They're designed to sway and flex rather than stand rigid against seismic forces. The lesson is clear. Sometimes the strongest solution isn't the hardest one, it's the one that knows when to bend. Vikings understood this 1,000 years before modern engineers rediscovered it, and their ships carried them farther than anyone thought possible. The soapstone cooking pot, the original non-stick cookware. While other cultures struggled with clay pots that cracked in fire or iron vessels that rusted and burned food, Vikings carved their cookware from soapstone, a soft, heat-retaining rock that could go directly from freezing cold to roaring flames without shattering. These pots represented a quantum leap in cooking technology that gave Vikings a massive advantage in food preparation and preservation. Soapstone, technically called steatite, is composed primarily of talc, which gives it unique thermal properties. It heats slowly and evenly, eliminating hot spots that burn food, then retains that heat for hours after being removed from the fire. Vikings discovered they could carve bowls, pots, and even griddles from this remarkable stone, creating cookware that never wore out and actually improved with use. The carving process was labor-intensive but rewarding. Vikings would select soapstone deposits during summer expeditions, then spend long winter months carefully shaping vessels with iron tools. The soft stone carved easily when fresh, but hardened with exposure to air and heat. Finished pots could hold several gallons of liquid and weighed much less than equivalent iron cookware. These pots heated evenly, retained warmth for hours, and never wore out. Vikings would use them to boil water, cook stew, render fat, or even bake bread when covered with coals and buried in embers. The stone's natural non-stick properties meant food rarely burned, and cleanup required only hot water and scraping with a wooden spoon. Soapstone's thermal mass made it perfect for Viking cooking methods. They could heat the pot thoroughly, then remove it from the fire to finish cooking with residual heat, crucial when fuel was scarce or fires needed to be extinguished quickly. This technique also prevented overcooking and kept food warm during long meals or while traveling. Modern off-grid enthusiasts are rediscovering soapstone cookware because it needs no seasoning, never rusts, and actually improves with use. The stone develops a natural patina that enhances its non-stick properties over time. You can still buy soapstone pots today, and they'll outlast any modern cookware while giving you the same reliable performance Vikings depended on during month-long voyages. Professional chefs prize soapstone griddles for their even heating and natural non-stick surface that no modern coating can match. If you are enjoying raiding the past with us, then give a nod to your inner Viking, pillage that like button, and subscribe for more journeys into Midgard living. The grain quern, portable flour mill that fits in your pack. Vikings couldn't survive on meat alone during long expeditions, so they carried portable grain mills called querns, two circular stones that could grind barley, oats, or wheat into flour anywhere they landed. These ingenious devices represented the difference between civilization and starvation, transforming raw grain into the foundation of every meal. The quern was so essential that Viking law protected millers, and grinding stones were among the most valuable possessions a family could own. The design was elegantly simple, yet remarkably effective. The bottom stone, called the bedstone, had a slightly concave surface, with grooves radiating from the center to the edges. The top stone, or runner stone, had a wooden handle attached and a hole in the center for feeding grain. The stones were carefully balanced so the runner stone could rotate smoothly while maintaining the perfect gap for grinding. Operation required technique and patience. Vikings would pour grain into the center hole while turning the handle steadily, allowing centrifugal force to move the grain outward between the stones. The grooves in the bedstone helped move the flour to the edges where it could be collected. Different grains required different techniques. Barley needed a coarser grind for porridge, while wheat was ground fine for bread. These weren't luxury items. They were survival necessities that turned raw grain into bread, porridge, or thickening for stews. A skilled operator could produce several pounds of flour per hour, enough to feed a family or ship's crew. The stones were often passed down through generations, becoming more effective as they wore into perfect alignment. Viking querns were sized for portability without sacrificing effectiveness. Ship-based versions were typically 12 to 18 inches in diameter, while household querns could be much larger. The stones were selected for hardness and texture. Too soft, and they'd wear away quickly. Too hard, and they wouldn't grip the grain effectively. Today's preppers and homesteaders use the exact same design because it needs no power, never breaks, and can process any grain or seed. Modern hand-crank grain mills follow Viking principles with steel mechanisms and stone grinding surfaces. A good hand-crank grain mill will serve your family for generations, just like it did for Viking families 1,000 years ago, turning stored grain into fresh flour whenever you need it. The birch bark container, nature's Tupperware, that never fails. Vikings turned birch trees into waterproof containers that could hold everything from drinking water to fermented fish, creating storage solutions that modern plastic manufacturers still can't match. Birch bark naturally contains oils that make it waterproof and antimicrobial, perfect for food storage in an age without refrigeration. These containers weren't just convenient, they were essential survival tools that could mean the difference between having safe drinking water and dying of thirst. The harvesting process required skill and timing. Vikings knew to collect bark in late spring when the sap was rising, making the bark pliable and easy to remove in large sheets. They'd make careful cuts around the tree trunk, then peel away sections without killing the tree. Sustainable harvesting that ensured future supplies. The inner bark was prized for its flexibility and waterproof qualities, while the outer bark provided additional protection. Construction techniques varied by intended use. For simple containers, Vikings would fold large sheets of bark into boxes or cylinders, then sew the seams with pine roots or sinew. The natural oils in the bark made the seams watertight without additional treatment. More complex containers featured wooden frames covered with bark, creating rigid vessels that could hold substantial weight. These containers were lightweight, flexible, and completely biodegradable. A large birch bark container weighed a fraction of equivalent wooden or ceramic vessels, crucial for people who moved frequently. The bark's natural properties actually helped preserve food longer than many modern containers. The antimicrobial oils prevented spoilage, while the breathable material prevented condensation that could cause rot. Vikings used birch bark containers for water storage during sea voyages, knowing that the bark would keep water fresh for weeks. They stored dried fish, preserved meat, and even live coals for fire starting in specially designed bark containers. The material was so versatile that Vikings made everything from drinking cups to large storage baskets, each designed for specific survival needs. Bushcraft enthusiasts still make birch bark containers because they're free, renewable, and work better than plastic in many situations. The containers are naturally insulating, keeping cold things cold and preventing hot liquids from burning your hands. In a survival scenario, knowing how to harvest and work birch bark gives you unlimited waterproof storage that costs nothing and lasts for years, biodegrading harmlessly when no longer needed. The clay bread oven, community kitchen, that fed villages. Viking settlements built communal clay ovens that could bake dozens of loaves at once using nothing but mud, straw, and stones, creating community kitchens that fed entire villages with remarkable fuel efficiency. These dome-shaped ovens worked on thermal mass principles that modern engineers are only now fully understanding. They could store enough heat from a single firing to bake bread for hours without adding more fuel. Construction was a community effort that brought settlements together. Vikings would dig clay from riverbanks, mix it with straw or animal hair for reinforcement, then shape it over a sand form to create the perfect dome. The walls were typically 4 to 6 inches thick, providing massive thermal mass that could absorb and store enormous amounts of heat. A chimney and door completed the structure, creating a sealed baking chamber. The firing process was both art and science. Vikings would build a large fire inside the oven, feeding it continuously until the clay walls glowed white hot and the dome cleared of smoke, indicating the walls had absorbed maximum heat. This process took 2 to 4 hours, depending on oven size and weather conditions. They'd then rake out all coals and ash, clean the floor with a damp mop, and test the temperature by throwing flour on the floor. If it browned in 10 seconds, the oven was ready for bread. One firing could feed an entire village, making it incredibly fuel efficient compared to individual cooking fires. The stored heat would bake perfect loaves for hours, starting with bread that needed high heat, then moving to slower cooking items like beans or stews as the temperature gradually decreased. This sequential cooking maximized the energy from each firing. The ovens produced superior bread with crispy crusts and perfectly cooked interiors that modern ovens struggle to match. The clay walls created steam that gave bread its characteristic crust, while the radiant heat cooked evenly from all directions. Vikings could bake flatbreads, raised loaves, meat pies, and even roast entire animals in these versatile ovens. Modern homesteaders and off-grid communities are rebuilding these ovens because they use local materials, need no electricity, and produce better bread than most modern ovens. In a long-term crisis, a clay oven gives you the ability to bake bread for your whole neighborhood using nothing but wood and clay. You can dig from your backyard, creating community resilience that no individual appliance can match. The tripod, cooking stand, adjustable heat control over open fire. Vikings perfected the art of cooking over open flames with simple iron tripods that could hold pots at exactly the right height above the fire, giving them precise temperature control that rivaled modern gas ranges. 3 legs joined at the top with a chain and hook. That's it. But this deceptively simple design gave them restaurant-quality heat management using nothing but fire and iron, enabling complex cooking techniques that fed armies and sustained long voyages. The physics behind the tripod were sophisticated, despite the simple appearance. By adjusting the chain length, Vikings could position pots anywhere from directly in the flames to several feet above the coals, creating temperature zones from boiling hot to gentle warming. The 3-leg design provided rock-solid stability on uneven ground, while the iron construction could withstand the intense heat of roaring fires without warping or breaking. Different cooking techniques required different heights and heat levels. Need to boil water fast? Lower the pot into the flames, where temperatures exceeded 1,000 degrees. Want to keep stew warm without burning? Raise it high above the coals, where gentle, radiant heat maintained perfect serving temperature. Vikings could simmer delicate sauces, render fat, boil bones for broth, or quickly sear meat by simply adjusting the chain. This wasn't just camping gear, it was the primary cooking method for most Viking households, from humble farmsteads to royal halls. Large tripods could support massive cauldrons that fed dozens of people, while smaller versions were perfect for individual meals. The system was so effective that Vikings rarely needed other cooking equipment, making it ideal for their mobile lifestyle. The tripod's versatility extended beyond simple pot hanging. Vikings used them to smoke meat by positioning food high above smoldering fires, to dry clothes and equipment, and even to provide lighting by hanging oil lamps or torches. Multiple tripods around a single fire created different cooking zones, allowing preparation of complex meals with multiple courses. Modern campers and outdoor enthusiasts still use this exact design because it's more reliable and versatile than any camp stove. Unlike gas burners that can fail or run out of fuel, a tripod works with any fire and never breaks down. Professional outdoor chefs prefer tripods for their infinite adjustability and the superior flavor that only wood-fired cooking can provide. In an emergency, you can make one from sticks and rope, giving you restaurant-quality heat control over any fire you can build. The principles work whether you're using iron and chain or improvised materials, proving that good design transcends technology. The butter churn, liquid gold that never spoiled. For Vikings with livestock, milk was precious but perishable, spoiling within hours in warm weather or freezing solid in winter cold. The solution was the butter churn, a simple wooden barrel with a plunger that transformed cream into dense, long-lasting fat that could survive weeks without refrigeration. This wasn't just food processing, it was survival alchemy that turned liquid liability into solid gold, providing crucial calories during lean times when fresh food was impossible to find. The churning process was simple but labor-intensive, requiring patience and technique that Viking women perfected over generations. Fresh cream was poured into the wooden barrel, then agitated with a wooden paddle or plunger in a steady rhythm. The mechanical action broke down the fat globules in the cream, causing them to clump together and separate from the liquid buttermilk. The process could take 20 to 30 minutes of continuous churning, often accompanied by songs or stories that helped maintain the rhythm. Vikings would churn butter in large batches during peak milk production, then preserve it using salt or by storing it in cool cellars. Fresh butter could survive weeks without refrigeration, especially when salted, providing crucial calories during lean times. The buttermilk byproduct was equally valuable. It could be drunk fresh, used in cooking, or fed to livestock, ensuring nothing was wasted in a society where every calorie mattered for survival. The economic importance of butter in Viking society cannot be overstated. Vikings would trade butter like currency, using it to pay taxes, settle debts, and purchase goods from traveling merchants. A family's butter production often determined their wealth and social status, making the churn one of the most important tools in any household. Skilled butter makers could command premium prices for their product, especially butter with superior flavor and keeping qualities. Different regions developed specialized churning techniques based on local conditions and preferences. Coastal Vikings added sea salt to their butter for preservation and flavor, while inland communities used herbs and berries to create unique varieties. Some Vikings discovered that churning at specific temperatures produced better results. Too cold, and the cream wouldn't separate. Too warm, and the butter would be soft and greasy. The wooden churns themselves were carefully crafted from specific woods that wouldn't impart unwanted flavors. Oak was preferred for its durability and neutral taste, while some regions used birch or pine. The churns were often passed down through generations, becoming more effective as the wood absorbed the natural oils and developed a seasoned surface that improved butter quality. Modern homesteaders still use this method because homemade butter tastes better, lasts longer, and gives you complete control over your food supply. Hand-churned butter has a richer flavor and better texture than commercial butter, while the process itself connects you to generations of food preservation wisdom. In a crisis, knowing how to turn milk into shelf-stable fat could mean the difference between thriving and starving, transforming a perishable resource into long-term sustenance that could feed your family for weeks. The sealskin float, unsinkable life preserver made from dinner. Vikings turned their food into safety equipment by inflating seal bladders into waterproof floats, demonstrating the kind of resourcefulness that kept them alive in the world's most dangerous waters. After eating the meat, they'd carefully remove the bladder, tie off the openings, and inflate it like a balloon. These natural floats were attached to fishing nets, used as emergency life preservers, or bundled together to make rafts that could support multiple people in freezing Arctic waters. The preparation process required skill and patience that Viking hunters developed over years of practice. The seal bladder had to be removed without puncturing, then cleaned thoroughly to remove any meat or fat that could cause rot. Vikings would turn the bladder inside out, scrape it clean with bone tools, then treat it with salt or smoke to preserve the material. The natural oils in seal skin made it completely waterproof while remaining flexible in cold temperatures that would make other materials brittle. Inflation was accomplished by blowing air through the natural opening, then sealing it with sinew or leather strips tied in complex knots that wouldn't slip under pressure. The inflated bladders were incredibly buoyant. A single large seal bladder could support a grown man indefinitely, while smaller bladders were perfect for keeping fishing nets afloat or marking underwater obstacles. The sealskin was naturally waterproof and incredibly durable. Some floats lasted for years of hard use in conditions that would destroy modern equipment. Unlike synthetic materials that degrade in UV light or extreme cold, sealskin actually became more supple and reliable with age. Vikings would oil their floats periodically to maintain flexibility, creating safety equipment that improved rather than deteriorated over time. These floats served multiple purposes beyond emergency flotation. Viking fishermen used them to mark the location of nets and traps, allowing them to fish in deep water without losing their equipment. Hunters used floats to retrieve game that fell into water, while explorers bundled multiple floats together to create emergency rafts that could carry people and supplies across rivers or coastal waters. The system represented brilliant resource management. One seal provided food, clothing, tools, and safety equipment, with nothing wasted. Vikings understood that survival meant maximizing every resource, turning what other cultures might discard into life-saving equipment. Modern survival experts recognize this as brilliant resource management that applies to any waterproof material. While you might not have access to seals, the principle applies to plastic bags, inner tubes, or any container that can hold air. In a flood or water emergency, knowing how to create improvised flotation devices from available materials could save your life, using the same principles Vikings mastered 1,000 years ago. The Antler tool handle, shock-absorbing grip that never breaks. Vikings discovered that deer and elk antlers made the perfect handles for axes, knives, and hammers, creating tools that could withstand decades of brutal use without the handle cracking, splitting, or coming loose. Unlike wood, antler has a natural shock-absorbing structure that prevents tools from breaking under heavy use, while reducing hand fatigue during long work sessions. This wasn't just convenience, it was survival necessity for people whose lives depended on reliable tools in environments where replacement was impossible. The unique properties of antler come from its internal structure, which combines the hardness of bone with the flexibility of cartilage. Antler grows rapidly during summer months, creating a honeycomb-like internal matrix that absorbs impact while maintaining incredible strength. This natural engineering makes antler handles superior to wood in almost every application, especially for tools that receive heavy shock loads like axes and hammers. Vikings would select antlers based on size, density, and intended use. Fresh antlers were easier to work but softer, while aged antlers were harder but more difficult to shape. They'd drill holes in the antler base using heated iron awls, creating perfectly fitted sockets for iron blades. The natural taper of most antlers provided an ergonomic grip that fit human hands perfectly, reducing fatigue during extended use. Installation required precise craftsmanship that Viking toolmakers perfected over generations. Iron blades were secured with wooden wedges driven into the antler socket, then wrapped with leather strips that tightened as they dried. Some handles featured metal bands or wire wrapping for extra security, creating joints that actually became stronger with use as the materials compressed and settled together. The shock-absorbing properties of antler were particularly valuable for Vikings, who spent hours chopping wood, building ships, or working metal. Wood handles would split under heavy use, especially in cold weather, but antler remained flexible and strong regardless of temperature. The natural oils in antler also provided a non-slip grip that improved with use, unlike wood that could become slippery when wet. These tools lasted decades of hard use without the handle cracking or splitting, often outlasting multiple blade replacements. Viking families would pass down antler-handled tools through generations, with some handles serving for over a century. The antler actually improved with age, developing a patina and grip pattern that made the tools more comfortable and effective over time. Modern craftsmen are rediscovering antler handles because they're ergonomic, durable, and actually improve with age. Custom knife makers prize antler for its beauty and performance, while traditional woodworkers appreciate its shock-absorbing qualities for chisels and mallets. In a survival situation, antler handles can turn scrap metal into reliable tools that will serve you for years, without maintenance or replacement, using the same techniques that kept Viking tools working for generations. These 10 Viking inventions represent more than clever engineering. They're proof that survival doesn't require the latest technology. What's remarkable is how accessible these solutions remain today. From Firesteel that never fails to clay ovens that feed communities, Vikings built their survival around tools that used local materials and human ingenuity rather than complex manufacturing. Start with 1 or 2 items that match your situation. Maybe a Firesteel for camping or a grain mill for food security. The Vikings didn't survive the harshest conditions on Earth by accident. They did it with tools that worked, period. If you enjoyed raiding the past with us, then give a nod to your inner Viking, pillage that like button, and subscribe for more journeys into Midgard living.